By giving our lives, we find life. Storyteller Mark Grossman. For the migrant farm worker, each day was endless. Each night he was exhausted and often hungry. His life stood in stunning contrast to the comfortable lives of the families who savored the fruits of his labor. In a land that promised plenty, migrant farm workers in the 60s had no voice, no rights, and no protections. Cesar Chavez knew their troubles firsthand. A migrant farm worker, he was small, soft-spoken, and low-key, a guy you could easily lose in a crowd. But this gentle giant woke up the drowsy conscience of the most powerful country in the world. For years, Americans had brought home sweet, plump clusters of table grapes without a second thought. By the late 1960s, Cesar Chavez had turned the decision of whether or not to buy grapes into a powerful political act. This quiet man with dark Indian features had changed the ordinary act of buying groceries into an opportunity to help others by exercising the power of socially responsible buying habits. Farm workers had been trying to organize a union for more than 100 years. In 1965, they began a bitter 5-year strike against grape growers around Delano, California. 2.5 years later, in the hungry winter of 1968, with no resolution in sight, they were tired and frustrated. Cesar decided to ask for help. He believed that if people in communities throughout the nation knew about the needless suffering of farm workers, they would rise to the occasion and do what they could to help. Taking a bold leap of faith, Cesar invited consumers to join in solidarity with his United Farm Workers, UFW. He asked them to send a message to the grape growers by boycotting California table grapes. The boycott began slowly, but built steadily over the next couple of years. First California, then the rest of the nation and even Canada joined in support of the strikers. In the meantime, some of the strikers had become impatient. To some of them, particularly some of the young men, the boycott seemed too little, too late. They began murmurings of violence. Some wanted to strike back. By fighting back, they thought they could prove their machismo, their manliness. But Cesar rejected that part of Hispanic culture that tells our young men that you're not a man if you don't fight back. He decided the time was ripe for a powerful lesson in nonviolence. The boycott had followed the tradition of Cesar's hero, Mahatma Gandhi, whose practice of militant nonviolence he embraced. And now, like Gandhi, Cesar announced that he would undertake a fast as an act of penitence and as a way of taking responsibility as a leader for his people. The fast divided the UFW staff. Many didn't understand why Cesar was doing it. Others worried about his health. But the farm workers understood. A mass was said nightly near where Cesar was fasting at the 40 acres, the UFW's headquarters in Delano. Hundreds, then thousands came. People pitched tents nearby. They brought religious offerings, pictures, and small statues. Farm workers waited in line for hours to speak with Cesar in his tiny room while he refused interviews with reporters. After 25 days, Cesar was carried to a nearby park where the fast ended during a mass with thousands of farm workers. He had lost 35 pounds, but there was no more talk of violence among the farm workers. Cesar's message had gotten through. Senator Robert Kennedy came to the mass, he said, out of respect for one of the heroic figures of our time. Cesar was too weak to speak, so his statement was read by others in both English and Spanish. It is my deepest belief that only by giving our lives do we find life, they read. The truest act of courage, the strongest act of manliness, is to sacrifice ourselves for others in a totally non-violent struggle for justice. To be a man is to suffer for others. God help us to be men. Cesar's efforts connected middle-class families in northeastern cities and midwestern suburbs with poor families in the hot California vineyards. Motivated by compassion, millions of people across North America stopped eating the grapes they had loved so much. At dinner tables across the country, parents gave their children a simple, powerful lesson in social justice by reaching out to those less fortunate than themselves. By 1970, the Great Boycott was an unqualified success. Bowing to pressure from the boycott, grape growers at long last signed union contracts, granting workers human dignity and a more livable wage. In the years that followed, Cesar continued to use boycotts and fasts to galvanize farm workers in their pursuit of a better life and to gather support from ordinary Americans to aid them in their efforts. In 1988, at the age of 61, Cesar undertook his last public fast, this time for 36 days, to draw attention to the pesticide poisoning of farm workers and their children. By the values many used to measure success in the 1990s, Cesar Chavez was not very successful. He had been forced to quit school after the 8th grade to help his family. He never owned a house. He never earned more than $6,000 a year. When he died in 1993 at age 66, he left no money for his family. Yet more than 40,000 people marched behind the plain pine casket at his funeral, honoring the more than 40 years he spent struggling to improve the lives of farm workers. An all-night vigil was held under the giant tent before Cesar's funeral at the 40 acres, where his body lay in an open casket. Thousands and thousands of people filed by until the morning. Parents carried newborn babies and sleeping toddlers in their arms. One farm worker explained, "I wanted to tell my children how they had once been in the presence of this great man." What was the secret behind such a remarkable display? A reporter once asked Cesar, "What accounts for all the affection and respect so many farm workers show you in public?" Cesar just looked down and smiled his easy smile. "The feeling is mutual," was his simple reply.